What if I told you that in ancient Rome, justice wasn't about fairness, it was about fear? The Romans believed punishment wasn't just for the guilty, it was a show, a warning, and sometimes pure cruelty. From men sewn into sacks with live animals, to soldiers forced to kill their own brothers, the empire turned death into spectacle. So sit back, relax, and prepare yourself as we count down the 12 most bizarre punishments from ancient Rome. Stay until the very end, because the final punishment is so strange, it barely seems human. This is Hours Lost in Time. 12th, Damnatio ad bestias, death by beasts. One of the most infamous forms of Roman punishment was called damnatio ad bestias, or condemnation to the beasts. This wasn't just an execution, it was a performance. Criminals, slaves, or Christians were thrown into the Colosseum or other arenas, armed with little more than fear, and set against lions, leopards, or bears. Sometimes the condemned were dressed as characters from myths, like Orpheus, only to be torn apart by wild animals as the crowd laughed. These bloody scenes were a mix of religion, theater, and death all rolled into one. For the Romans, punishment was never private, it was entertainment. And the louder the screams, the louder the applause. 11. Crucifixion. Although we often associate crucifixion with Christianity, the Romans had been using it long before. It was considered the punishment of slaves and rebels, those who threatened Rome's order. Victims were tied or nailed to wooden crosses and left to die over hours, sometimes days. Death came slowly from exhaustion, thirst, and suffocation as the body gave way. Romans didn't just crucify, they displayed. Crosses were set up by roadsides and hills where travelers would see them, a living billboard of Rome's power. In some cases, victims were even crucified upside down, intensifying pain and humiliation. Crucifixion wasn't about execution. It was about making death last as long and as visibly as possible. 10th Fustuarium, the beating of soldiers. Discipline in the Roman army was brutal. A soldier who deserted, stole, or fell asleep on guard duty could face the dreaded fustuarium. This meant death by clubbing, carried out by his fellow soldiers. Imagine standing in the ranks, ordered to strike your comrade again and again, knowing that if you refused, you might take his place. It was psychological warfare as much as physical punishment. Rome built its military reputation on loyalty, and fustuarium reminded every soldier that their survival depended on the obedience of the man beside them. It was not just about killing a deserter, it was about cementing terror into the very bones of the legion. 9th Poena Cullae, the sack of death, perhaps the strangest punishment Rome ever invented, was reserved for the crime of parricide, killing your own parent. The condemned was sewn into a leather sack with 4 animals, a dog, a snake, a rooster, and a monkey. The sack was then thrown into a river. The symbolism was deliberate. Chaotic creatures trapped in a chaotic death. It was a punishment designed not only to kill, but to horrify. Romans saw parricide as the worst possible betrayal, and so the punishment had to be worse than anything else. To die gasping for air, clawing in darkness, trapped with hissing and shrieking animals, it was terror made flesh. 8. Branding and mutilation of slaves. Slavery was the backbone of Rome, and punishment for slaves was uniquely cruel. A runaway could be caught and branded on the forehead with letters marking them forever. Others had their ears cut off, or were forced to wear iron collars inscribed with humiliating phrases, "Hold me, I am a runaway." These punishments weren't about reform, they were about ownership. A branded slave was a living advertisement of their failure and their master's power. Imagine walking through Rome, knowing every glance reminded you that you were marked as less than human. In Rome, sometimes surviving was its own punishment. Quick question, are you enjoying the video so far? If so, drop a like and let us know in the comments below which punishment shocked you most. Now on to number 7. 7. Tarpeian Rock. Death by defenestration. High on the Capitoline Hill stood the Tarpeian Rock, a sheer cliff overlooking the city. For traitors and criminals guilty of treason, this was their fate. Bound, paraded through the streets, mocked by crowds and hurled from the cliff. The fall didn't always kill instantly. Bones shattered, bodies broken. Many survivors writhed at the bottom until executioners or even scavenging animals finished the job. What made the Tarpeian Rock bizarre was the ritual leading up to the fall. Condemned men were beaten with rods, their clothes stripped, their dignity erased. Then, in one final gesture, Rome hurled them from honor to oblivion. 6. Execution by burning alive. When the Romans deemed a crime so unforgivable it required total destruction, they turned to fire. Arsonists, witches, or enemies of the state could be tied to a stake, covered in pitch or oil, and set alight. Flames licked the night sky as entire communities gathered to watch. The crackling fire was not just death, it was spectacle. Burning was seen as cleansing, as if the fire purified the corruption within the condemned. But to those watching, it was a grotesque theater of smoke and screams. And when the fire died, all that remained were ashes, erased, scattered, forgotten. 5. Humiliation. Punishments. Not every punishment ended in blood. Some sought to destroy pride instead of flesh. Adulterers were forced into ridiculous costumes and paraded through streets. Corrupt senators were stripped of robes and dignity, displayed for all to mock. Debtors were chained and made to stand in marketplaces, their poverty exposed to the world. The Romans understood humiliation could last longer than pain. It turned reputation, the lifeblood of Roman society, into a weapon. For some, death was preferable to a shame that would never fade. 4. Damnatio memoriae, erasing from history. In Rome, you could be killed twice, once in body and once in memory. Damnatio memoriae was the condemnation of memory. If declared, your name was chiseled off monuments, your statues destroyed, your portraits defaced. Your very existence was denied. In a culture obsessed with honor and legacy, this was worse than death. Imagine living your whole life for glory, only to have history itself turn its back. To Romans, memory was immortality. To lose it was the ultimate punishment. Quick question, are you enjoying the video so far? If so, drop a like and let us know in the comments below which punishment shocked you most. Now on to number 3. 3. The cross-dressing adulterer. Romans loved turning punishment into theater, and nowhere was that clearer than in cases of adultery. Men caught cheating might be paraded through the streets dressed in women's clothing. The goal wasn't torture, it was mockery. Masculinity, pride, honor, all stripped away as the crowd laughed. In a culture obsessed with dignity, this was brutal. Some men reportedly begged for death rather than face such humiliation. The punishment was strange but effective. After all, in Rome, your reputation was your life. 2. Death by molten lead. One of the most terrifying punishments ever recorded was death by molten lead. Though rare, accounts describe traitors being forced to swallow molten metal or having it poured over them. Whether every detail is true or exaggerated, the Romans made sure the story spread. It didn't matter if molten lead was used often. What mattered was that people believed it could be. Fear, not frequency, made it powerful. In Rome, sometimes rumor was punishment enough. First decimation, death by numbers. The most brutal punishment of all was reserved for Rome's legions, decimation. If a unit disobeyed orders, showed cowardice, or mutinied, 1 in every 10 soldiers was chosen by lot to be executed by the rest. Guilt or innocence didn't matter. Fate decided. The chosen men were clubbed, stoned, or stabbed by their own comrades, forced to die at the hands of brothers. It created trauma, mistrust, and fear. But it worked. Rome's legions marched on, bound together not just by loyalty, but by terror. Decimation was Rome's ultimate reminder. Obedience was survival. And there you have it, the 12 most bizarre punishments from ancient Rome. From beasts in the arena to molten lead, from humiliation to the erasure of memory, the Romans turned punishment into theater and cruelty into control. What do you think? Were these punishments justice or madness in the name of order. This has been Hours Lost in Time. If you want more strange and forgotten stories from history, subscribe now, because next time we're venturing into the bizarre punishments of medieval Europe.